Tonight, a major California crop is threatened, not by what's there, but what's not. It's a real buzzkill because the bees are dying.
Yeah, I think it's a total natural disaster. This whole thing is going to implode. It honestly is going to implode.
No one can pinpoint the cause, but some who've spent their lives in the business think they know exactly what it is.
I've worked bees with my father from 6 years old on, and I don't need a researcher to tell me there is or isn't a problem. There is a problem going on with the bees right now, and it's chemical related.
Also, eradicating polio. Doctors in the slums of Pakistan fight against filth, disease, and the CIA.
So over the last few months, we've seen thousands of individual parents take the decision not to get their kids vaccinated because they think it's part of a CIA plot.
We'll bring you the news tonight on Dan Rather Reports.
Good evening. Tonight we begin with fear of an agricultural disaster, and it could happen soon because of bees, or the lack of them. We've reported extensively on this broadcast about the mysterious disappearance of honeybees. Scientists have been unable to pinpoint the exact cause, but the little insect that's responsible for pollinating 1/3 of everything we eat is dying quickly. And some of the biggest commercial beekeepers are now saying the unthinkable. Their industry may be on the brink of extinction, with some unable to rebuild after 50 to 90% losses this year. The latest alarm comes from the fields of California, where it's a new spring, but it's anything but normal. Each year in late winter, a spectacular and little-known event plays out in these fields.
Syrup running everywhere.
1.5 million beehives from nearly every state in the Union are shipped on tractor trailers into California's Central Valley. Their mission? To pollinate 800,000 acres of almond trees. This is the largest mass pollination effort in the world, and it happens for just a few days every year. Most of the world's almonds, 80% in fact, come from this one patch of earth. And they are 100% dependent on honeybees to produce a crop.
I'm baked. We've been going like this for weeks.
John Miller is a fourth-generation beekeeper out of Gackle, North Dakota.
Yeah, I'm supposed to go over to River Rio.
He spends half the year here in the Central Valley. His family has managed honeybees since 1894.
This is the last semi. There's 25 semi-loads of bees come in. These bees spend the winter in a potato cellar in southeast Idaho where it's dark and quiet, just like bees used to be in the forests of Germany millions of years ago. Then we bring them out here and whoa, the bright light, and oh, bloom. You know, the almond tree wakes up in February. We disperse them, you know, as per instructions with our customer, and then hope the bees do their work. You know, this is a great time of year. This is the best job on earth. You know, you wouldn't even have to pay me and I'd do this. I'll recount them and give you the numbers. Okay.
Miller is moving roughly 11,000 hives this year, renting his bees to growers on a tour that starts first in the almond orchards and then moves to cherries, apricots, and finally, for his outfit, apples in Washington state. It is not a profession for the faint of heart, working around millions of armed insects.
This is a smoker. This calms the bees. Yeah, it's burlap. This came from Starbucks. These guys are orienting because they just got here, and they're like, whoa.
The bees are ready to go. but the almond trees are not. Particularly cold mornings like this bring a risk of frost and have pushed the almond bloom now 2 weeks later than usual. So the choppers get to work fanning the cool air away from the treetops while the bees wait. But the late bloom is not what has Miller worried.
See this stack, see these pallets over here in the distance? These are lids, these are tops that go on beehives. All those lids came off hives that are dead. We came down, we worked those bees, and they were dead. The camera can't see it, but that's hundreds of beehives. And there are piles like that on this 400-mile-long bee yard called the Great Central Valley. It's this miracle of agriculture. And there are dead hives from the north to the south and everywhere in between. And I'm just a tiny little piece of it. There's hundreds of guys just like me.
Guys like Jeff Anderson.
What can you say?
Anderson has been in the bee business for 37 years.
400 pallets there. Should have hives of bees on them.
Like just about every beekeeper we talk to, Anderson's outfit is 4 generations, going on 5. He and his wife Christine, along with their 4 grown children, one with a family of his own, split the year between their primary residence in Minnesota and their migratory home here in Oakdale.
You see that truck? Mm-hmm. Looking at a truck that my dad and my grandpa, probably in 1962, driving from California to Minnesota, but there's bees just dripping off the sides of the truck. It was very typical when I was growing up. We never see anything like this. I wish we did. It would mean we have healthy bees.
The Andersons bring their hives out to California in the fall, after a full summer of foraging and honey production in the fields of Minnesota. In general, beekeepers leave their healthy hives alone over the winter as the colonies go into a more dormant state. At that time, lifting a lid would be a disruption. So it's not until closer to almond season, when the temperature starts to rise, that Anderson was able to find out the kind of state his hives were in.
Frankly, I'd go up and work bees for half a day and we'd quit, because you literally get sick working at, bees that look that bad. But you have to get through it. I mean, I've got contracts to fill, and I will not take junk hives into my growers.
The Andersons lost 70% of their hives this year.
I've got over 2 semi-loads of dead-out equipment.
The suspected culprits run the gamut from pesticides to mites to drought. Everyone has an opinion. Is it something from last fall, last summer, or the last almond bloom? The fact is, honeybee populations have been suffering for decades, and it is happening to the best of them. Anderson is on the National Honeybee Advisory Board.
It's beautiful.
And Miller is the president of the California State Beekeepers Association.
Bees got here with the Pilgrims, about 400 years ago, and things went really well for about 370 years. The past 30 years have been just tumultuous. Probably 40% of the national herd is dying or is dead. If 40% of all the chickens in America died, you'd have politicians tub thumping up and down the Capitol and it'd be a national crisis. Bees, meh, food comes from the store. Where in the hell do they think food comes from? Here's a guy who lost his entire outfit. Those are 100% dead. Dead.
Reports of bee shortages threatening the almond crop have been in the news before. And yet, the last couple of years saw California's largest yields to date, each 2 billion pounds. So what's different about this year? Beekeepers tell us the unthinkable is happening. For the first time ever, growers can't find bees.
There are almond guys on the phone this morning who are in tears because they have no bees, and they can't find any bees at any price. It's a wreck.
Miller's name for Pollination Tour 2013? Death Rattle.
We're not sustainable. We can't keep going down this path. We're losing. We're losing.
We decided to take a road trip, crisscrossing California's Central Valley north to south, to investigate if the almond crop really does face a crisis this year. One would never guess the drama that's playing out on the fields from the looks of the main streets. This is Ripon, population 14,000, self-proclaimed almond capital of the world. Despite the late bloom and with nary a flower in sight, today is the annual Almond Blossom Festival, a chance to parade this year's almond blossom queen in her court. Almond orchards stretch along a vast corridor 2 hours north of Sacramento, all the way to the foothills bordering Los Angeles County. More than 6,000 almond farmers, a full half running small operations on less than 50 acres. The largest almond grower in the world is here too. Paramount Farming Company in Kern County has close to 46,000 acres of almond trees.
The nice thing about growing trees is you get to know the orchard over a long period of time.
Joe McIlvain is the president of Paramount.
The Central Valley is unique. It has a unique combination of climate, soils, and a water supply. Almonds require a very dry climate, but they also require a lot of water to grow successfully. So that combination is really found in very few places in the world. In China, for example, the areas that are dry enough to grow almonds are too cold, and the areas that are warm enough to grow almond are too wet.
71% of the almonds grown in California are exported overseas, with China, Spain, and India the largest markets. With almonds now being used in everything from baked goods to milk, and more focus on almonds as a healthy snack, they have even surpassed wine and dairy as California's most lucrative agricultural export, bringing in more revenue than wine and dairy combined. It's been a good time to be an almond grower up to now, but large farm or small, Mother Nature needs a hand, or rather a buzz, to make a crop.
Almonds are not self-fertile. This almond tree will not make a single almond by itself. It requires the pollen of a second almond tree. If we don't have bees in the orchard, we make no crop whatsoever.
A world without bees would be a pretty boring place. You'd be eating oatmeal, corn tortillas, and that would be about it.
Gordon Wardell, Ph.D., is the resident bee biologist at Paramount Farming Company. Being the largest almond grower in the world means they are one of the few who can afford to have their own scientist on staff. Paramount needs more than 90,000 hives.
10 years ago, California wasn't demanding this number of colonies. One of the beekeepers calls it the great promiscuity. You know, we're exchanging diseases with everybody, then they go home and refine those diseases and come back again.
But beekeepers tell us they like to bring their hives here because Paramount is doing a lot of things right. They don't spray anything on the bloom while bees are present, and they pay a premium for strong, healthy colonies, which is judged by the number of frames.
This colony is probably about 12 to 14 frames of bees, and that's a very good pollinator. We ask the beekeepers to bring us colonies that are around 8 with a 5-frame minimum. We don't want anything less than 5. If the weather is marginal, they're not doing as well.
Paramount acknowledges to being impacted by the shortage in that they're having to make do with fewer hives per acre. But they're telling us they're not too worried. Fingers crossed for good weather, they say they should be able to spread out what they do have. But just down the road,
this pink bud here will turn...
Smaller growers, the majority of farmers out here, are experiencing something else entirely. With only days left until bloom pops, they're struggling to find hives off the, quote, junk pile.
There is rumors that there's 100,000 acres of almond trees that do not have bees to pollinate them.
Up next, the bloom is on, and so is the mad scramble for bees. You'll want to see it, so stay here with us.
We are in Bee Central. This is it right here. Room blah, blah, blah in Modesto, California. This is my favorite room. Had it for 5 years now.
If anyone has a sense of what's really going on in the almond fields this year, it's Denise Qualls. She's got a job description you've likely never heard before. Bee broker. For 2 to 3 months of the year, Qualls leaves her San Francisco Bay Area home and her husband to live out of a hotel room about an hour and a half east in Modesto.
We could be out of there by 3. And that's
She runs the Pollination Connection, finding hives for her vast number of mostly smaller almond growers. She's trying to place upwards of 40,000 hives this year.
I was in banking for almost 20 years, wore a suit and high heels, and now I'm out talking with growers and beekeepers and wearing cowboy boots, and I got my jeans lined up, and I get amazed every once in a while that I'm doing this today.
Qualls' brother is a commercial beekeeper, but she says it's her networking skills and sheer passion for what she sees in the fields that helped her triple her business since she started 7 years ago.
I find this working with beekeepers just fascinating for me. They look at their bees as part of their family. The cattleman does not look at the heifer as part of his family. The horseman doesn't do that. Certainly the chicken guy doesn't do that.
The morning we meet with Qualls, she tries and fails once again to fit in a workout at the fitness center.
Small job, but I ended up having to use like 3 different beekeepers to get it covered.
The phone won't stop ringing. This season is unlike any she has ever seen.
And I had one beekeeper that he's worked for me for almost 10 years, and he just wasn't returning my calls. I went out and found another 3,000 hives after this guy didn't make it. Yes. I think it's a total natural disaster. Somewhere, this whole thing is going to implode. It honestly is going to implode.
After a shower and breakfast, it's back to work.
It's a tough year for everybody.
It's normal for Qualls to be on call around the clock, but this year she finds herself driving 300 miles a day, calming worried growers and searching the country for every last bee she can scare up.
There were days that I felt like, man, I don't know how I'm going to make this. I don't know. I don't remember what I was talking about. Like, what are we going to do? Pull bees out of our ass? Where are we going to find them? You can't go to the store and buy them.
I've learned more about bees in the last 60 days than I've known in my whole lifetime. Keystone.
Ray Veldhuis started growing almonds as a hobby when he purchased 20 acres back in 1987. Today, he runs an 1,100-acre orchard and dairy farm in Merced County on a ranch passed down from his grandfather. He says he's never seen anything like this year.
Panic is still going on. Last night, one of my employees who lives in an orchard about 20 miles from here said there was 16 hives stolen out of the orchard around his house last night. Some people haven't realized till the last week that there's a problem with bee pollination.
The beekeeper Veldhuis has worked with for the last 7 years called him the first week of January with the bad news. Their bee colonies had collapsed and they were going to lose at least 50%.
I didn't sleep the first night. You think you've solved your problem, in 48 hours you get another phone call. They say, sorry, we don't have them. We lost our bees, and we're not going to be able to meet our contracts. And then 24 hours later, you find another beekeeper who has 500 hives, and then 48 hours, he calls you back and says, I don't have hives. And then 2 days later, you find more hives, and then that guy says, well, I don't have hives. But it's devastating because your whole year, your whole income for the next 12 months could be affected by this problem.
Veldhuis got lucky. A bee broker managed to find him hives all the way from Georgia and Florida, convincing beekeepers who don't usually like to bring their colonies to the almonds. It's a story we heard echo across the valley. Growers may not be getting as many hives as they want, but at the last minute, they're able to get at least something. The health of those colonies and whether they can do the job is another matter entirely. It's Thursday night in Fresno at the region's legendary pie chain. The Central Valley Beekeepers Association holds their most important meeting of the year.
Okay, good evening. Before I start talking about pesticides, I'd like to talk about bee thefts. Oh, yeah, Gordy? You lost some at Paramount?
We had 150 stolen on the east side.
Or they're going with...
Beekeepers like Gene Brandy of the American Beekeeping Federation are here from all over the U.S. tonight because they're in the same boat and they don't know what to do.
So what have you heard about the hive dwindling issue? We've just seen so many of them that look great in December, and then over the Christmas, they just kind of dwindle down to, you know, 6 frames, 4 frames, 3 frames when they were 12, 10 frames.
I've seen that.
I've seen it too. Yeah. There's nothing definitive on what's causing it.
That's true. That's true. I mean, if you look at nutrition, mites, diseases, and pesticides, I think it's in that group. Okay, that narrows it right down there.
Clearly, it's no laughing matter. There's talk of the drought in the Midwest last summer that left bees dependent on sugar supplements, as well as pesticides and fungicides used on the almond bloom itself. But many are equally, if not more, concerned with the long-term consequences of pesticides they see year-round. The more recent class of systemic pesticides called neonicotinoids, which we reported on in 2011. They are now used on most of America's major crops, especially corn.
The amount of treated seed going into the ground is growing more and more every year. I don't know that I'm getting any damage from the planting of it, but it definitely comes up in some quantity in the pollen.
One of the more immediate targets, however, is the varroa mite, which John Miller, the beekeeper we met earlier, was unfortunate enough to find in one of the hives he opened for us.
This bee right here has a little red dot on her back. That's a varroa mite right there. That is Satan incarnate. That is the central challenge of beekeeping globally. You can imagine how hard it is to kill a bug on a bug. It's the hardest thing I've ever tried to do.
Some think that if the industry can get the mites under control, that should go a long way towards solving the problem.
My hats are off to everyone in here who's still alive.
Inevitably, the focus of the meeting turns back to the crisis at hand, simply how to get through this season.
Well, the challenge now is I'm having guys call me about bees for cherries, and I'm like,
oh yeah, no, can't do that.
No, I mean,
we're short for the amp. Yeah.
Denise Qualls drove the 2 hours from Modesto to join the meeting, riding on the relief of seeing her last 2 truckloads of bees arrive earlier today.
I mean, I felt like the cavalry had just arrived and we were going to be saved. I felt like I was at the Alamo or something.
There's one big question that remains unanswered.
Now we'll be going out and looking at the bees that are actually in the orchards, some that have been there for a few weeks because bloom is so late, just to see what the quality is, see if they're actually still alive, which may or may, I mean, the possibility of them not being alive is very high.
It's the next day, and we joined Denise Qualls on the road.
If the bloom was earlier, would have been an agricultural disaster because those bees would have never gotten here in time.
Today begins the next critical phase of almond season, hive inspection. Growers are writing beekeepers checks for hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, banking most of their income on what will happen in these few days. And many still have little idea if there are bees under those lids. And as we now know, there is reason to worry.
Wow. See what we got here.
So almond growers hire inspectors like Qualls to find out if they have healthy hives. This is Qualls' second hat. She only inspects orchards she did not provide bees for this year.
Let's see what he had the year before.
She's checking on close to 48,000 hives. Her first stop is the first grower to hire her 8 years ago, Earl Perez of Crow's Landing.
The bark, you see the bark there? And below that is a rootstock.
Perez is quick to show a visitor how an almond tree is actually only almond above the ground. It's often peach tree below. Farmers graft almond trees to peach trees to make the trees more resilient and the nuts taste better. Perez told us the bee shortage didn't affect his farm and that he's confident this year will be like years past.
We're not too worried because we had pretty good luck, you know, up to now, you know. God knows what the future will bring.
We pick one corner per pallet, and we pick the same one, go all the way around so that we're consistent.
The inspector's job is to count the number of frames per hive that are considered healthy, about 2/3 full of bees. Growers generally need about an 8-frame average out of a possible 16 to 20 for pollination. 5 frames is the minimum.
Oh, that doesn't look good.
Nothing here.
There's nothing in that one.
No. No, empty. 2. It's a 1.
1?
It's a 1. Maybe 1 there and definitely 1 here.
Yeah. And I think he's being really generous.
Hive after hive that Qualls randomly chooses for inspection come up 4 frame, 2 frame,
Yeah,
empty.
that's sad.
When all is said and done, Earl Perez ends up with only a 4.1 frame average. It will be weeks before he knows for sure, but in most years, that is not enough to pollinate a crop. Full bloom blankets the valley over the course of the next 2 weeks, and the pattern is repeated far too often, on inspection after inspection. But there is also this sight, one that deeply concerns beekeepers. Acre upon acre of newly planted almond trees.
If I was an almond grower, my response would be I would be planting walnuts, knowing what I know, where the bee industry is headed.
Lyle Johnston is the largest supplier of bees in the country. He says the almond industry has put the cart before the horse and that there's little chance they can pollinate all these new almond trees coming online. He's heard short-term projections that almond growers will need 150,000 more hives in the next 2 years alone.
Just in my group, they're talking a 15,000 hive increase. That's a 25% increase in my operation, and I would have no idea where we're going to come up with 15,000 more hives. You know, I believe we'll be lucky if we don't drop 15,000 hives next year off of our orders. Great looking hive there.
Until recently, Johnston placed most of the blame for unhealthy bees on poor beekeeping. But this year changed him. He's now convinced there is something more fundamental at play: pesticides.
I've been around bees all my life. I've worked bees with my father from 6 years old on, so you just learn bees, and I don't need a researcher to tell me there is or isn't a problem. There is a problem going on with the bees right now, and it's chemical related. The guys that were damaged the most were guys that chased the sunflower crop this year to make a honey crop in North Dakota. Those bees lost 60–70%. They were gone.
Johnston summers his own bees away from agriculture. He puts them in the mountains of Colorado, and he lost very few hives this year. He feels that the ball is now clearly in the Environmental Protection Agency's court, and that their response will be critical.
I think what happens over the next 2 months will determine the future of beekeeping.
Just what is the government's response to bee losses this year? That part of our story is straight ahead.
The commercial honeybee industry is one of the cornerstones of our entire food supply. It's valued at $350 billion to agriculture worldwide.
Well, I think this should last until...
And it happens to be the food that tastes good, just about every fruit and vegetable imaginable. If trends in honeybee declines continue, will we see skyrocketing food prices and fewer apples, blueberries, and pumpkins on store shelves? In the last 7 years alone, estimates put the cash lost to beekeepers from hive deaths at over $1 billion.
Bees should be boiling out.
Just how worried are government regulators? This March, the EPA sent its highest-ranking official yet to California's Central Valley for a tour with beekeepers and almond growers. Jim Jones oversees the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention. Beekeepers who were there told us Jones got the message. The bees are in trouble, big trouble. But they say he seemed more interested in finding new places for bees to forage than in controlling pesticides. And then there was this. In early March, beekeepers descended on the Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Pesticide Programs headquarters for what was being billed as Pollinator Summit 2013. The beekeepers had high hopes they would get some answers.
I know you're all aware of the challenge that we're facing globally in terms of pollinator declines that have been going on for decades.
Stephen Bradbury is the director of the EPA Office of Pesticide Programs.
Clearly, there are multiple causes to the declines that have happened over the decades, ranging from habitat modification to culturing practices to nutrition to pathogens, as well as the potential role of pesticides.
The summit was in fact perfectly timed for the start of pollination season. But most of the discussion had nothing to do with almonds or the bee problems in California.
One of our innovative thinking employees at Bear Crop Science had an idea.
It was mostly pesticide manufacturers who were on the docket: Bayer, Syngenta, Monsanto, DuPont. The vast majority of the panels were moderated and presented by pesticide companies talking about new advances in corn seed treatment, specifically how to prevent chemical dust from drifting in the wind.
These are, again, air planters, and they're very precise.
No doubt this is an important issue for beekeepers. Preventing bee kills from exposure to corn seed dust is one important piece of the puzzle. But when it came to addressing specific concerns regarding honeybees, the panelists had few answers.
Could you please elaborate on any specific actions and tests you're currently conducting to assess potential impacts on pollinators and honeybees?
I can't say that there's anything going on, but your point is well noted, and we'll speak with and develop relationships with manufacturers to understand that issue a little bit better.
For hours, there was no discussion of the dire state of hives in the almond fields of California. Then the Department of Agriculture's lead bee scientist, Dr. Jeff Pettis, took to the podium.
I'm always a very optimistic guy, but this year is particularly bad.
Dr. Pettis had just come back from a tour of the almond orchards.
And in past years, like I think 2009 year, bees of this caliber would never even be rented. The beekeeper wouldn't bring them, or they wouldn't be paid for.
He went on to say that he thinks pesticides are indeed playing some role. The EPA did invite one beekeeper, the country's biggest, Brett A.D., who lost over 40% of his hives this year.
If the only thing we're going after is just have the world's most awesome ocean-to-ocean corn crop, we're going to lose a lot as a nation.
A.D. is concerned that even with the improvements in dust drift technology, there's just nowhere left for bees to forage. The best areas have traditionally been in the Midwest, but conversion of grasslands to corn and soy, not a good food source for bees, is occurring at record rates. 1.3 million new acres in just 5 years. That's a rate comparable to deforestation in the Amazon.
And it was a very good paper.
Beekeepers say they are desperate for good pasture and more support.
Without help from other ag industries and government entities, beekeepers won't be able to survive and service the pollination needs.
Many beekeepers were wondering whether federal help was on the way, but a USDA representative offered little reason for hope.
So I did check into this last night to see what could be done at this point. At USDA, our hands are tied. There's nothing we can do without having funds authorized. So that's out of our hands. So you can take that and do what you want with it.
The USDA is actually a leader in the research into causes of honeybee declines, with millions of dollars invested in projects around the country, as well as their own bee lab. But to beekeepers like Jim Doan, there's no time for delay, no time to wait for answers. He needs healthy bees this year.
So if I don't come up with the numbers, or some of the other people that are in Florida that are already under stress don't come up with those numbers, we're going to come up short for apples. The blueberry growers are already talking about coming up short on blueberries in Maine. This is a real crisis. We need help.
Doan pollinates 10% of all the apples in New York State. He lost and had to rebuild every single one of his hives over the last year.
We cannot keep bees in agricultural areas any longer. And my family's kept bees for over 60 years in the same area that we've been keeping bees. So.
In the last few weeks, Doan and 3 other beekeepers joined a lawsuit brought by the Center for Food Safety against the EPA for what it says is the EPA's, quote, failure to protect pollinators from dangerous pesticides.
Should we be looking at actually...
Everybody acknowledges that this is a complicated topic.
I like to argue that it's not rocket science. It's much more difficult than that.
Bradbury of the EPA's Office of Pesticides says they are taking this complicated matter very seriously.
The point was today we're focusing on one set of issues. By no means is this all that we're working on. We're working on the full gamut, from acute to chronic effects to the interplay of pesticides with other stressors such as nutrients, habitat loss. All those kinds of factors are being addressed.
Back in California's almond orchards, pollination season is over, and the final verdict is in. Beekeepers say the almond industry dodged a bullet. Unseasonably good weather meant that even weak hives, ones they ended up paying more for than strong ones, were sufficient. And beekeeper Lyle Johnston thinks this may leave people with their head in the sand, under the false impression that there were plenty of bees this year.
I'm convinced the bee industry is doomed. I don't give it much over 2 to 3 years unless something has changed through the EPA to monitor these chemicals that are coming off the market and the effects they're having on the bee industry. I think beekeeping in the United States is going to become a thing of the past.
Today in the United States, polio is a distant memory. It was wiped out here in 1979. But worldwide eradication of the disease is proving elusive, even though billions of dollars have been spent during 2 decades of vaccination campaigns. Polio is still killing or crippling hundreds of children in small pockets of Africa and South Asia every year. And recently, there's been another setback in the fight against this terrible disease, an unintended fallout stemming from one of America's greatest intelligence triumphs. The slums of Pakistan's commercial capital, Karachi, are crowded, filthy, and deadly. There are about 5 violent murders here each day. But lurking in the city's primitive sewers is another killer altogether, the polio virus. Millions of people live and work on these streets, including Usman. He's a father of 4 who scrapes by working at an auto parts shop. It may not look like much, but it's a job he says he's lucky to have, because Usman had polio.
तो इसकी वजह से तकलीफ तो है, रीढ़ की हड्डी पे इंसान को दर्द होता है, मुझे पता है कि माजूर को क्या होता है ना, तो रीढ़ की हड्डी पे तकलीफ होता है, सीने में इंसान को दर्द होता है. तो मेरी वालदा भी यहाँ है, मगर इस घर में नहीं है, ये घर छोटा है. मेरे
The polio virus in its most severe form attacks the spinal cord and can cause paralysis of the lungs and legs. The disease festers in the human waste that flows unchecked through these streets and right past Usman's front door. He knows that his own children are at risk from the poor sanitation. But helping those children and everyone at risk for polio are some very experienced and brave healthcare workers who risk their lives on the mean streets of Karachi every day.
And how many children she had yesterday?
Dr. Elias Drury runs the World Health Organization's polio vaccination efforts in Pakistan. Originally from Ethiopia, Drury has been conquering the polio virus in countries across the globe for more than 20 years. He successfully eliminated polio from hotspots such as Sudan, Yemen, and Somalia. And now he has Pakistan in his crosshairs.
She has total number of children here.
We accompanied Dr. Drury and local doctors on some house calls.
You have people who are living not a shanty house, but in a housing developments that are no basic health service and cramped in the same place. And this is where the virus really has, a much better environment for it to just keep replicating.
Last year saw just 223 cases of polio worldwide. The vast majority of them in 3 chaotic and poorly governed countries: Nigeria, Afghanistan, and here in Pakistan.
If there is any country or any district or any place that remains, with the circulation of the virus, nowhere in the world we will be safe.
There is a safe, inexpensive, and effective polio vaccine that can protect children, even if their playground is the trash-strewn streets of Karachi's slums. This is what the fight against polio looks like in Pakistan. Hundreds of thousands of workers methodically go door to door, urging parents to vaccinate their children. If they agree, all it takes is just 2 drops of the vaccine placed in the child's mouth. Once vaccinated, the child's finger is marked with ink. If the parents refuse, the health workers mark the door with a special symbol in chalk and vow to return. Other workers collect samples from the open sewers. The vials are sent to a state-of-the-art lab in the capital, Islamabad, and screened for polio. The lab, which was built with donations from around the world, also tests samples from suspected victims. It's all part of a global effort to rid Pakistan of the crippling virus. But Dr. Drury's hopes of a polio-free Pakistan were checked in the past 2 years when parents suddenly started refusing the polio vaccine for their children.
They didn't want to vaccinate. We are from WHO just to make sure that you know what is important. Could you please tell them why we are here?
Drury says the impoverished people have always been suspicious of vaccination campaigns, long rumored to be Western plots to harm Muslims.
American policy नहीं है ये. कोई नहीं हमारे बच्चों को अपाहिज होने से बचाने के लिए वैक्सीन पिलाने आ रहे हैं आपके घर पे.
And the vaccination campaigns in Pakistan came to a screeching halt in 2011.
The death of the most wanted man in the world, Osama bin Laden.
After the midnight raid on Osama bin Laden's walled compound. Everyone knows what happened in Abbottabad, but it's what the CIA did before the deadly raid that has people in Pakistan talking.
As part of the operation I'm about to get intelligence on bin Laden, there was a failed operation to use hepatitis B vaccination program to uncover evidence of DNA from the bin Laden family in Abbottabad. The news of the operation leaked, and the story that the CIA had used a vaccination campaign spread like wildfire across the region.
Charles Kenny is a senior fellow at the Center for Global Development and a former World Bank economist. He studies the effects and consequences of foreign aid, including vaccination campaigns. Kenny says millions have been poured into eradicating polio and correcting the myths and lies of Western meddling. But all those efforts were erased in an instant when the U.S. government decided to use a vaccination campaign as cover to gather DNA samples from the Abbottabad compound. That was an effort to confirm bin Laden's family was inside. But the plot had serious consequences.
So over the last few months we've seen thousands of individual parents take the decision not to get their kids vaccinated because they think it's part of a CIA plot.
Excuse me, and it was a fact the CIA had used this.
Nobody has come out in public and said, yes, the CIA regularly uses vaccination campaigns as part of intelligence gathering, but senior government officials in the US have said, yes, this was part of an attempt to get information related to bin Laden in Abbottabad.
Execute.
Americans heard the story of the fake vaccination plot when the CIA scheme was dramatized in the Academy Award-nominated movie Zero Dark 30.
We started a vaccination program. Sent a doctor to the house, see if he could pull blood.
Back in Pakistan, the story of the CIA's fake vaccination program reached polio victim Usman, almost 1,000 miles away in Karachi.
माल रहा था इब्टाबाद के इलाके में और उन्होंने इस तरह करके इस ऑपरेशन को सर अंजाम दिया तो लोग घबरा गए कि पोलियो महम में ये लोग आके हमसे मालूमात लेते हैं.
So Usman, who had allowed his other 3 children to be vaccinated, turned away the polio health workers when they came to inoculate his 2-year-old son Musharraf. Soon after, Musharraf woke crying and couldn't stand, and his father's fears were soon confirmed. His youngest son had polio. It was the first polio case in Pakistan this year.
अफसोस तो इतना हुआ कि कोई इंतहा नहीं है. ये तो होता है कि अगर मैं कराता इसको वैक्सीन और इसको ये काम नहीं होता. अफसोस तो मुझे इसलिए है ना कि मैं खुद इस बीमारी का शिकार हूँ तो मुझे इसकी तकलीफ का पूरा अंदाजा है.
Musharraf is not the only casualty of the CIA vaccination cover operation. The CIA hired Dr. Shakil Afridi to run the fake vaccination campaign in Abbottabad, and when news of the doctor's eventual arrest and trial broke, all 200,000 polio vaccination workers in Pakistan were suddenly suspected of being spies. What has been the fallout from the situation where U.S. intelligence used the vaccination program as a cover, as a front, if you will? What's been the fallout from that?
We have seen the Taliban, who previously were not targeting vaccination workers, target vaccination workers saying they are part of the CIA plot.
The killings started in December 2012. During a bloody 2 days, 9 polio health workers were shot. And in January, another 9 were killed, along with a policeman protecting them. All told, 18 polio workers and 2 policemen have been assassinated in planned hits.
We still have refusals even where we are.
For Dr. Duri, who says Pakistan is the most dangerous place he has worked, the assaults were unprecedented.
This is a new thing that we have not seen this before. Violent resistance with what we are doing.
2 of the first victims in this onslaught were 18-year-old Madiha Bibi and her aunt, a mother of 4, Famida Bibi. Their family told us how 2 men approached them on a motorbike and opened fire. Famida died instantly, while Madiha fled to a nearby home. The attackers followed and shot her in the face at close range.
टीम की 2 लड़कियां हैं वो शहीद हो गई हैं तो बस मैं इतना परेशान हो गई कि मेरे से बात भी नहीं हो रही जो मेरी बेटी मुझे सबसे ज़्यादा प्यारी थी घर सब मुझे कहते हैं ना रो मैं क्या करूं.
The slain woman's mother, a health worker herself, has been too upset by the assassinations to continue as a vaccinator, and she was not alone. After the killings, thousands of terrified polio workers refused to go to work, and vaccination drives halted. The Pakistani government scrambled to provide security for the workers, and several weeks later, the campaigns restarted. But only after tens of thousands of police officers were assigned to escort the health workers on their rounds.
They are superheroes. Most of them are mothers, most of them are sisters. But, the fact that almost throughout the country, the campaign has been somehow, restarted. And for them to have that much of commitment, I don't have a word to how we can appreciate them. And really, they are heroes, not only for Pakistan, but I think heroes for the world.
Despite the setbacks, there have been only 5 confirmed cases of polio in Pakistan this year, far fewer than last year at this time. And yet, Dr. Duri and the healthcare workers
redouble their efforts because they know this insidious rumor and disease still fester in the alleyways. Usman learned the hard way that he was wrong to listen to rumor mongers and refuse vaccinations for his son, but he says the United States also bears some responsibility.
अगर एब्टोबात वाक़या ना होता और वो अखबारों में पोस्टर ना छपते और हम तक इल्म नहीं आता तो हम लोग वैक्सीनेशन और सही लगा रहे थे और सही अपनी रूटीन के मुताबिक लगे हुए थे.
But then can we check this room? Yeah.
And Elias Dury says he'll be here in Pakistan, knocking on doors and handing out vaccines for as long as it takes.
What we do has to be done for those who sacrifice their life. It's not only for the children that we love. It's not only for the program that we say is important globally. It's also really important for those who lost their life. I think we really have to work harder so really that what they've died for is not in vain.
And that's our report for tonight. From New York, for Access TV, Dan Rather reporting. Good night.
If you would like to add your name to an email list for information on upcoming programs, or if you would just like to send a question or comment, please email us at viewer@access.tv.